They laughed like knives. Not loud, sharp, precise. The chandelier burned white over crystal and silver, and in that glittering light Evelyn Crest tilted her chin and let her voice slice the air. "Say that again," she purred, and the room leaned in the way people lean toward fire. Amara held the tray tight against her ribs. She could feel the metal tremble. She could feel her own pulse answering it with a small drum. Her accent, the same sound that carried her across oceans and into long nights of work, had just stepped into this room, and for that, the richest woman at the table decided it would be the joke. The guests smirked, faces painted with wealth and champagne. One raised a phone and pretended to fix their hair while the camera watched like a little eye that never blinked. Amara's throat went dry. She could taste the lemon from the last glass she served and the salt of her own pride. Evelyn's smile stretched wider, thin as a blade. "Go on," she said. "Don't be shy. It's adorable." The word adorable landed like a slap and then echoed across marble and gold leaf. A sound that promised to replay in Amara's head when the house went dark. She did not answer. She did not apologize for being born somewhere beautiful. She lowered her eyes, because that kept food on the table, and said in a voice that didn't break, "As you wish, ma'am." The laughter flared, then died like a match. The string quartet kept playing something sweet that tasted bitter. Amara turned. She walked, slow, careful steps, her shoes whispering over the floor. The room breathed again. The phone went down. No one noticed the man at the far end stop smiling. No one noticed the small brown folder tucked into the side of Amara's handbag, the corner bent like it had been read too many times. They saw a uniform. They did not see a map. In the hallway, the air was cooler. It smelled like polish and old money. Amara leaned against the wall for 1 second, 2, and let her breath fall into place the way plates do when you stack them right. She counted silently in twee like her grandmother taught her when the world felt heavy. 1, 2, 3. Then she pushed into the pantry where the light hummed and the teacups sat like little soldiers waiting for orders. Her hands steadied. She wiped the rim of a glass that didn't need wiping. She checked the clock. Another course soon. Another parade through those eyes. She closed her own for a heartbeat and saw Accra at dusk, orange and purple, her father's hand pointing toward a building he swore one day she would own. She heard her mother's voice say, "Use your mind, not your anger." She opened her eyes and went back to work. In the dining room the talk ran on like a river that forgot where it was going. Evelyn's bracelets chimed every time she lifted her wrist. "Such a darling accent," she said now to the table, letting the words roll around like ice in a glass. "I can barely understand it, but isn't it charming?" The guests smiled the way people smile when they're afraid to be the first to say enough. A man in a charcoal suit cleared his throat and said something about the fundraiser. Evelyn waved it off. "We're fine. We're among friends." She looked toward the kitchen door, as if a trick might come out of it. The door stayed shut. The quartet slid into another song, softer this time, as if the music itself wanted to hide. Amara came back with the fish course. She set a plate before each guest, and her hands did not betray her. She did not drop a fork, she did not let a single drop touch a napkin. When she reached Evelyn, she felt the woman's eyes lift her like a scale and find her wanting. "Thank you," Evelyn said, sweet as a lemon with the rind still on. "Would you repeat the sauce for us?" She knew what she was doing. Make her speak. Make the accent dance. Make the room laugh. Amara glanced at the chef, a man with tired eyes and clean nails. He looked away, shame in the set of his mouth. She could refuse. She could pretend not to hear, but she had learned the hard way that silence can cost more than breath. She named the ingredients. Not fast, not slow, just true. Her voice filled the small circle between them. The vowels held sunlight. The consonants clicked like beads touched one by one. When she finished, nobody laughed. For a second, the room didn't know what to do with the sound of a person being a person. Then Evelyn gave a little clap, a child's clap dressed up as a woman's, and the spell broke. "Lovely," she said. "Simply lovely." She swallowed wine and swallowed something mean with it. The phone came back up. The moment passed, but it did not leave. Service carried the night forward. Plates in, plates out. Amara's feet drew a map between kitchen and table and hallway and back. Her face stayed smooth, a still lake with storms underneath. She caught her reflection once in the glass of a framed painting, and she saw someone she recognized but did not want to be forever. A woman bending, a woman making herself small so air would not cut her. She put the drinks on a tray and straightened her spine. She imagined each vertebra stacking truth on truth until her body felt like a column in the house, holding weight. When she passed the window, the city winked at her with 1,000 lights, each one a life, each one a story that could be told in a room where no one listened. A waiter brushed past. "You okay?" he whispered, eyes quick and kind. "I'm fine," she said, and her mouth made the word behave. He nodded and moved, because work does not stop for feelings. In the kitchen, the chef set down his knife and cleared his throat. "I'm sorry," he said, without looking up. She does what she wants." Amara wiped a spotless counter. "So do I," she said. He looked at her then, the way a man looks at a small candle that refuses to blow out. "You shouldn't have to," he said. "No one should." She smiled without joy. "And yet," she said. Between courses, she slipped into the back corridor where the light was bad and the walls were close. She opened her handbag and touched the folder like it could feel her pulse. Inside, papers worn thin at the edges, numbers with meanings, sketches of rooms rebuilt and lives rehoused, a proposal with her name set neat at the top, not the name they called when they wanted water. The name her mother wrote on her first notebook, Amara. The pages smelled like printer ink and hope. She tucked them away. She could hear Evelyn in the next room tell a story about a school she might fund if the press liked the photos. "We don't need to get lost in details," Evelyn was saying, and laughter clung to her words like perfume. Amara stood still. Details are where lives live, she thought, in the spacing of floorboards so a wheelchair can pass. In the shade trees planted where the heat hits hardest. In the way you speak to a person when you think nobody of value is listening. Dessert arrived with a flourish. Flambe lit the air blue for a breath, and guests gasped the way people gasp at pretty danger. Evelyn basked in the glow. When the plates were cleared and the coffee cups breathed steam, she rose to give a little speech about gratitude that never said thank you to anyone who worked. She said community 5 times like a charm. She said opportunity and meant marketing. She said impact like it had a price tag. The quartet softened. The staff lined the wall. Amara kept her eyes on the linen. Evelyn finished with a gentle bow and an ugly smile and led the applause for herself. At last the coats came out, and the guests drifted off with air kisses and the promise to donate what they would not miss. The phones went in pockets, the laughter shrank down to a murmur, the house sighed. Amara gathered the final plates and felt the quiet lay over her shoulders like a shawl. In the pantry, she set down the tray and let her hands rest on the edge of the sink. Her fingers left small crescent prints on the steel. She pressed until the cool made her bones remember who they belonged to. The clock told her it was close to midnight. In the staff entrance, the night smelled like rain, and the street lamp buzzed like an insect with a secret. She stepped outside for air. The sky was a dark bowl holding a few bright stars. Somewhere a car laughed its engine into life. She thought of the folder again. She thought of the meeting she had tomorrow in a room with different chairs and a different kind of power. She thought of how dignity can be quiet, but it is never weak. Evelyn's heels clicked toward her, a metronome set too high. "There you are," the woman said, not unkind, not kind. Just full of herself. "We need the downstairs ballroom polished before Saturday. Important people coming." She meant richer than rich. Amara nodded. "Yes, ma'am." Evelyn studied her face, as if hunting for the place to put a new joke. "I do hope you're not sensitive," she said lightly. "We were only having fun." Amara kept her eyes level. She could see a small chip in Evelyn's nail polish, a tiny imperfection refusing to shine. "Of course," she said. "Fun." Evelyn tilted her head. "Say good night again," she said, forcing a laugh into her throat. "I like the way you say it." There it was. The last twist of the knife to mark the night. Amara let the silence sit between them until it grew heavy. "Good night," she said at last, the word warm and whole, and too big to be mocked. She turned toward the door. In the narrow stairwell, alone, she took the folder out and pressed it against her chest. The paper bent around her heartbeat. She pictured the map in her head one more time, the one nobody in the dining room would ever see until it made them clap for a future they could not imagine. She imagined walking into a different building, into a glass room where her accent could exist without being asked to dance. She imagined laying the pages down before men who measured worth in margins and showing them something that grew people instead of profits. She imagined the look on Evelyn's face when the house itself answered to a name she had refused to learn. A small smile, not of revenge, but of promise, moved through her. She smoothed the papers. She tucked them back. She wiped her eyes where no one could see. Then she went down the last flight, the kind of steady step that builds a life. In the staff locker room the fluorescent light hummed and the benches waited like patient friends. Amara sat and unlaced her shoes one by one. The night lay quiet around her, except for the distant rumble of a city not asleep. She whispered a prayer into the space above her hands. Not for Evelyn, not for the guests. For herself, for the proposal. For the families on those pages who did not know yet that their names were written into a plan made by a woman who refused to vanish. She rose. She slipped the folder into her bag again. She touched the door handle and paused. Somewhere, upstairs. A glass rolled on wood and settled. Somewhere upstairs, a woman laughed at something small. Down here, in the bright, buzzing now, Amara closed her eyes and told herself the truth out loud so it would not forget her voice. A good idea doesn't care where it comes from. A good idea will knock until someone opens. She opened the door to the night. The air was cool, and the road looked long. She stepped into both, and the house behind her swallowed its own echo. Morning arrived like a bruise that wouldn't fade, and the laughter from last night rose with the sun, thin and sharp, slipping into Amara's chest when she tied her apron and stepped into the echoing halls of the Crest estate. The house glowed the way rich houses do, as if money itself was a kind of daylight, but the glow didn't touch her. She moved in the quiet lanes the staff knew by heart, along the baseboards where dust hides, behind the grand piano where gossip curls, past the portrait wall where oil and gold frames watched her without blinking. The laughter replayed. The phone pointed like a finger. The word adorable stuck in her throat like a thorn. Her rag met wood, her breath met rhythm. She polished and disappeared, but each sweep was measured. Each stroke was a line drawn through the memory that tried to stain her. Because under the silence, something was building. A shape, a plan, a fire that did not smoke. She took inventory the way soldiers count ammunition. Silver stacked, glass shining. Steps counted, words saved. She was not just a maid, she was a woman rebuilding her life one paid hour at a time. Back home there had been plans laid on long tables and a team that trusted her voice. Back home there were blocks of empty lots made new with her hands, her pen, her stubborn hope. She could still smell wet cement after the first rain and hear children racing down new hallways with shoes that squeaked like joy. Then came the loss like a mouth swallowing the sky. A fire that ate through years in one night. A partner's betrayal that signed her name to debts she never made. Papers stamped with cold ink, a visa that said start again. But meant start from the basement, where they don't say your name unless you're late. She didn't run from it. She carried it. She folded the past tight, tucked it behind her ribs, and came to this house where good china lived better than most people. Evelyn's voice slid down the stairs at 11 like perfume with teeth. Brunch. Friends. Cameras, maybe. A chance to be seen being generous. Amara set the table with a precision she could do in her sleep, each fork aligned, each napkin folded into a soft wave. She checked the water glasses for fingerprints and saw her face in them, small and warped, but present. The door opened, and the women spilled in with heels, clicking, laughter fast and restless, rings catching light like tiny suns. Evelyn led them, the center of a universe she believed she owned. Ladies, she sang, today I unveil my little project. She poured the word little full of diamonds. She sat, the others sat. Amara served fruit, then eggs, then the kind of bread you buy when you're buying applause. While she poured the mimosas, she listened. She had learned how to listen in rooms that didn't ask her to speak. Evelyn talked numbers, like a woman wearing a dress she couldn't breathe in. Affordable units, she said, as if the word affordable made her mouth itch. Sustainable design. She rolled it around without tasting it. A community hub. She liked that one. It sounded like a party. She spread glossy printouts on the table, and the women leaned in as if looking at jewelry catalogs. Amara's hand paused mid-pour. The fonts were familiar. The sketch of the central courtyard, the shade pattern, the low roof lines to funnel heat, the rainwater channels that curved like answering hands. The way the daycare faced the kitchen gardens so parents could see their babies through glass and keep their hours without breaking their hearts. The numbers along the margin, those small brave numbers that told the truth about cost and time and the price of hope. Her idea, her plan, her late nights in the maid's quarters with a thrift store laptop and a slow printer that wheezed but kept its promises. Her name was not on any page. Evelyn's was stamped in gold ink that didn't believe in shame. The mimosa bottle tilted. Amara brought it back to level like a tightrope walker who will not fall today. The room felt smaller, the air held its breath. She set the bottle down and watched Evelyn hold up the plan to admire herself in it. "This will change everything," Evelyn said. "I've always believed in giving back." One friend patted her hand. "You're a force, Ev." Another leaned back and sighed. "Imagine the press." A third adjusted her sunglasses even though they were inside and murmured, "We must have a ribbon cutting. Red. Long." Amara's jaw went still because if it moved, words might fall out, hot and honest. She went to the kitchen and leaned into the cool stainless steel, as if it could take heat from her skin. The chef looked up. "You okay?" he asked in a voice that sounded like a man who has seen too much and decided to care anyway. "Fine," she said. It was not a lie. Fine is the thin bridge between break and survive. Evelyn called for more fruit, more ice, more things that sparkled. Amara carried in a tray. One woman, younger than the rest, with a freckle by her left eye and a conscience that kept peeking out, asked, "How will families qualify?" Evelyn blinked. "We'll have a form," she said. "Nothing complicated. We don't want to attract the wrong kind." Wrong kind. The words bumped against Amara like shoulders in a crowd. She kept her face quiet. The younger woman pressed. "And the design? Who planned the flow?" "It's actually good." Evelyn smiled. "I have a team," she said, and looked toward the ceiling as if that was where ideas grew. "We refined it." Amara set down a plate and caught the younger woman's eyes for a second. In that second there was a question. A flicker. The kind of flicker that starts a change if it finds air. When the brunch ended in a drift of perfume and promises, Amara cleared the table slowly, her hands precise even when her heart wanted to shake. She stacked dishes in a rhythm that steadied her. She found one of the printouts abandoned near a lipstick stain. She folded it into her apron the way someone might slip a photograph next to their skin. In the pantry, she took it out and laid it beside her own draft, the one she kept in her bag like a talisman. The lines matched, the math matched, the future she dreamed of wore a stranger's name. She pressed her fingertips to the corner where her name should have been and felt a heat rise that wasn't anger alone. It was a vow knocking. It was a voice waking up. Day fell into evening. The house changed clothes. Guests left. Quiet returned like a friend who tells the truth. The windows began to hold the city's reflection, and the skyline blinked with secrets only the night knows. In the staff room, Amara sat on the edge of the narrow bed that sagged in the middle where the day always won. She held the printouts side by side. She thought of the neighborhood she had walked where the ground remembers every footprint. She heard kids shouting names across courtyards and a woman humming while tying a headscarf before work. She remembered men fixing bicycles on stoops with laughter that didn't need money. She remembered the fire in her old office and how paper curls when it lets go. She remembered the embassy line, the cold chairs, the new language that pressed on her tongue until it fit. She breathed through all of it and let her breath smooth the edges. Her phone lay face down like a small animal that had done all it could for one day. She flipped it. No messages, no miracles, not yet. Her accent, the same music they tried to make a toy, rose in her mouth like a prayer that comes back when you need it. "Tomorrow," she said to the window, to the city, to the air that carried voices from far away. "Tomorrow, I speak." She let the words sit there. She made them heavy. "And this time, you will listen." The room did not answer. The room didn't have to. She stood and went to the tiny sink and washed her hands like she was washing the night off. She watched the water run clear and thought of rivers and crossings and the way you can stand on one bank and see the other and know you will get there even if you don't know how. She dried her hands and smoothed the papers again. Before she slept, she rehearsed not the sound of her voice, but the weight of her eyes when she would meet theirs. She rehearsed calm, she rehearsed truth, She rehearsed the way you hold a door open and refuse to move your foot even when someone pushes. She thought of the younger woman's freckle and the question behind it. She thought of the chef and his tired kindness. She thought of all the people who would never be invited to sit at Evelyn's table but would one day eat dinner at tables built inside walls that started in Amara's head. In the quiet, she felt the moment gather like rain in a full sky. Tomorrow wasn't a threat. It was a promise with a heartbeat. She lay back, the city lights painting soft squares on the ceiling, and listened to the house breathe above her, to the world adjusting, to a silence that felt like the second before a song begins. Then she closed her eyes, not to retreat but to ready, and let the cliff of the night hold her at its edge until morning came to push her forward. Chapter Noma 3. The boardroom felt like a museum for money, all glass and gold, and the quiet hum of power pretending to be polite. Cameras waited like hunting birds along the back wall, perched on tripods, beaks made of lenses. The city hung beyond the windows in silver slices, a skyline that looked expensive even in daylight. Evelyn stood at the head of the table in a suit, the color of smoke, chin lifted, smile arranged like jewelry. She had her pitch deck glowing on the screen. Perfect slides in a perfect font that made everything look clean. Investors leaned back in leather, hands folded just so, rings catching light. An assistant clicked a pen. Someone cleared their throat because sometimes control likes to hear itself. "Ladies and gentlemen," Evelyn began, voice smooth as poured cream, "today, I present my vision for a better city." She let the words linger, watching them sparkle above the table like confetti. Then the door opened. It didn't slam, it sighed. And in walked Amara, no uniform, no tray. No little smile that says I am allowed to be here if I make myself small. She was dressed in a simple dark dress with a neat collar and a plain portfolio in her hands, and she carried herself like a woman who had met storms and learned to stand still in the eye. Whispers cracked like ice dropped into a glass. Heads turned in one careful ripple. A camera operator, bored moments ago, straightened as if the focus knob had gripped his spine. Evelyn blinked fast, then put her voice on a leash. "Who let the help in here?" she hissed. Throwing the word help across the room like a stone she expected to hit and return, the assistants froze. The receptionist in the corner stared at the floor. A guard shifted his weight, unsure whether this was a scene or a fire. Amara did not flinch. She did not look at the guard or the cameras or the woman whose laughter had once been sharp enough to bruise skin. She stepped to the end of the table, set down her portfolio, and opened it with steady fingers. The room heard the soft sound of paper meeting air, and in that tiny sound something heavy began to move. Her voice came first like a gentle bell, and then grew into a clear note that filled the edges of the room. "This," she said, pointing to the model on the screen, "was my design." She didn't shout, she didn't plead. She let the truth walk on its own feet. "My vision. My plan to give homes to the families you called unprofitable." The word unprofitable landed like a dropped coin in a church. Loud because it did not belong. Silence pulled tight. The investors leaned forward, heat moving under their suits, curiosity louder than their manners. Evelyn's mouth opened and closed. She tried to laugh, but no sound came, because the laugh she used for sport had found a wall it could not climb. Amara reached into her portfolio and laid out the original drafts, corners softened from long nights and hard hope. She clicked the remote. The slide changed. Not the polished rendering, but the first drawing, her hand in every line, the courtyard arcing like an embrace, the rain channels curving like forgiveness. "You want to know what it costs?" she said. A number appeared. Not big enough to scare people who measured their worth in private jets, but big enough to prove a point. "This works because we save money where pride likes to waste it. Because we listen to the ground. Because we count children as if they were investors too." She pointed again. Shade trees positioned to drop the temperature by 7 degrees in summer. A daycare window where a mother can see her child while she works. A kitchen that doubles as a classroom so a teenager can do homework while watching a pot that won't boil over into a fire. She flicked to a slide with small math on the edges, the kind that tells the truth while the big number smiles. Maintenance costs down 30%. Turnover down 40. Dignity up 100. She looked up then and let that last number hang, because the math of dignity is not on most spreadsheets, and yet every person in the room felt it stack. Evelyn snapped like a person drowning in a shallow pool. This is ridiculous, she said, voice wobbling under the weight of exposure. She was hired to serve. She is confused. Her eyes fished around the room for a laugh to borrow and found none. She turned on her heel, presenting her profile to the cameras that now loved her less. Security. She tried. The guard didn't move. The investors didn't blink. Amara clicked another slide. On the left, a photo, a block of tired buildings, paint peeling like old lies, a yard of dirt. On the right, a later photo, bright walls, a courtyard lined with benches, kids chasing a ball through puddles that stayed out of living rooms because the drainage was right. Accra, she said softly. Phase 2 of a project I led before fire and betrayal and paperwork taught me patience. The same design you now call yours, the same bones, the same soul. Her accent folded around the words like light around water. It did not ask permission to be beautiful. A man at the table, gray at the temples, coughed into his fist, which is how men say I am about to admit I see you. What's your background? He asked. Amara met his eyes. Property development, she said. Community-led design. I have broken ground with a broken heart and still delivered under budget. She turned to another investor, a woman with a watch that ticked like a tiny drum. Ask me about timeline. The woman did. Amara answered with a schedule built from weather and labor and the simple truth that if you feed workers good food, they build good walls. Ask me about risk, she said to the room, and a younger man with perfect hair took the bait. She showed him a slide on local vendors, another on training teens for paid apprenticeships, another on partnerships with churches and clinics that understood that stability is not charity. She did not raise her voice. She did not say, please. She divided the truth into pieces small enough to swallow and kept handing them to people who had never been fed this way. Evelyn faltered toward anger because it was the only coach she knew. You think you can walk in here and ruin me? The question trembled because it understood the answer. Do you know who I am? The old chorus. The old mask. Amara's face softened, and in that softness there was steel. Yes, she said. You are a woman with money who forgot that money is a tool, not a title. She tapped a page with her name printed clean at the top, Amara Nkrumah. Then another page where that name had been cut off at the margin like a limb. Her hands did not shake. And I am the designer you laughed at in your dining room. The cameras adjusted. They could smell a story now, a real one, not the sugar Evelyn fed them. The investors shifted, chairs whispering on marble. The older man at the table spoke again, voice lower. Can you run this at scale? Amara nodded. Yes, if you let the people who live there help build it. Yes, if you agree that profit grows stronger when it grows with people, not on top of them. For a heartbeat, the city seemed to lean against the glass to listen. The room was not gold anymore. It was bare. It was honest. It held breath and history at the same time. Evelyn grabbed the clicker, desperate, and jammed to a slide with her face and the word visionary on it. The image looked cheap now, like a poster for a show that got cancelled. I brought this opportunity to you, she said to the investors, forcing a smile that stung. I cultivated it. Amara did not look at the slide. She looked at the people. You don't have to choose me, she said. But you can't choose a lie and expect it to build homes that stand in the wind. She lifted her chin. This plan can save money and save face and save lives if you let it breathe. And if you don't, I will still build it somewhere else. Because this kind of idea doesn't die just because someone rich tries to own its name. The younger investor, with perfect hair, leaned in, elbows on the table now, rules forgotten. If we move forward, he asked slowly, what do you need? Amara counted on her fingers, the way you count when you don't want to memorize anything but truth. A ground lease that isn't a handcuff. A contractor list that doesn't pretend certain neighborhoods don't know how to work. Materials ordered by people who know why the cheapest ends up most expensive. And a seat for a tenant on the oversight committee. She stopped there. Respect, she added after a second. I need respect. The word did not tremble. It took its chair and sat at the table, as if it had been invited all along. Evelyn's face drained of its carefully painted color. She whispered one word that wasn't meant for microphones. You? It came out like a question she had been taught never to ask because the answer might break the mirror. Amara's eyes held hers without heat, without apology. Me, she said. The same accent that once drew laughter now drew breath from the room. The same voice that had been treated like a trick now moved numbers and men. In the glass behind them, the city kept its own council, lights winking like yeses waiting for a signature. The board chair glanced around the table, measuring the wind. Pens hovered, throats cleared, cameras drifted closer, slow as tides. Somewhere down the hall, a printer spat paper like a clock that had decided to shout. Evelyn reached for a glass and missed it by an inch. It wasn't the glass she wanted, it was the past. And the past, at last, refused to be held. The older investor set his pen down. The younger one lifted his. The woman with the ticking watch leaned back to make room for a new story at the center of the table. And in that humming, hanging second before anyone chose, before any hand signed, the room seemed to tilt toward Amara, the way a field leans into the first rain. Then the chair cleared his throat to speak, and every breath in the room waited on the edge of that single sound. They said it on every screen like it was a storm warning, and in a way it was, headlines rolling over glossy anchors' lips, push alerts trembling phones in quiet kitchens, voices on radio shows that liked to laugh at the powerful when the mask finally slipped. Former Maid exposes Socialite in multi-million-dollar scandal. The words ran through the city, under subway tracks and over rooftop gardens, through penthouse brunches and corner barbershops, finding every ear that ever wondered what truth sounds like when it finally stops whispering. In the Crest Mansion, a house that always felt too proud to creak, the air went still. Investors withdrew with tight emails and colder signatures. Partners who once kissed both cheeks at galas left voicemails that said we'll reassess and meant goodbye. The florist canceled a standing order. The chef called in sick and never came back. The piano in the marble foyer looked like it had heard everything and decided not to play anymore. By the second day, Evelyn realized her home was not a jewel in a crown. It was a cage made of mirrors, and every reflection showed a woman she did not recognize. Her phone didn't stop. Statement drafts with soft words that meant nothing. A publicist saying, "Apologize, not for what you did, but for how it looked." A lawyer saying, "Don't admit, don't concede, don't breathe wrong." A friend who wasn't a friend saying it will blow over, "Darling, it always does." And for the first time in her life, Evelyn knew something would not. She walked from room to room like a tourist in a museum dedicated to her own face. Portraits, awards that didn't remember the names of the people who built the stage. Dresses in closets lit like exhibits. She opened a window and the city's sound climbed in, sirens and laughter and the warm thrum of lives not spent polishing silver. In the kitchen she found a chipped mug the staff used, and the chip felt like the only true thing in a house that lied. She held it, thumb resting in the fault line, and somewhere under the weight of shame a thought landed heavy. I did not know who she was because I didn't care to know. The mansion answered with a quiet, so complete it felt like judgment. When the invitation went public for the groundbreaking, the one announcing the date and the time and the street corner where Amara and her team would turn dirt into a promise, Evelyn printed it on plain paper and held it like a summons. No cameras, she told herself. No stylist measuring grief, no staff to manage the angles. She drove herself in a car that had never been alone with her, and the wheel felt strange in her hands, like control, like penance. The city changed as she moved through it, glass giving way to brick, the clipped hedges of her world opening into open stoops and kids' chalk along the curb. She parked 2 blocks away because a part of her did not believe she deserved to be close. She walked the rest under a sky that hadn't decided between sun and cloud. The sound reached her before the sight, voices layered with joy and patience, the soft rhythm of a drumline, a preacher's hum turned into a crowd's low chorus. When she turned the corner, she saw a sea of faces she had never invited into her home but who had always lived in her city. The people scrubbing its bones, cooking its meals, teaching its children, holding its doors. At the front stood Amara, not in silk, not in armor, just in a simple dress with a field of small blue flowers that seemed to borrow the morning and lay it across her shoulders. There was a ribbon, not the thin red kind you pull for a photo and forget, but a thick braided rope woven by hands from a neighborhood class, dyed with colors that meant home in tongues Evelyn had never learned. The stage was only a platform made of lumber and love, but it held, behind it, a row of framed drawings on easels like a gallery hung in the open air. On one table, a neat grid of keys on small brass rings shone like tiny suns. Children chased each other in the dust where foundations would soon be poured. A woman with paint on her sleeve laughed the kind of laugh that cleans a room. A man in a mechanic's shirt stood with his arm around a teenage boy whose eyes kept jumping between the stage and the future. Volunteers passed out paper cups of cold lemonade because the day had decided to be warm after all. And there, at the edge of the crowd, Evelyn stopped, the hem of her coat catching wind like a sail that had forgotten where it was going. No reporters. No staged backdrop. No podium taller than the people. Just a lot of truth and a lot of air. Amara stepped forward to speak before the first shovel touched soil. Her voice was the same voice that once made strangers chuckle because they did not recognize music when it didn't come from their own radio. Now that voice was a bell that called the hour. "Welcome," she said. "Welcome home before home is even built." The crowd answered with a low hum that felt like a hand on your back, saying keep going. She thanked the partners who stayed. She named them. Not the companies, but the people who answered phones and sat in church basements and wrote grants at midnight. She named the teens who had done summer apprenticeships and then stayed on, because paying work builds strong ankles. She named a grandmother who had gathered signatures at the laundromat, because justice rarely comes to your door. You have to carry it. Then she lifted the first key and held it up so the light could bless it. A small girl with a pink beret clutched her mother's hand and tugged, eyes big as planets. "Is that ours?" she whispered, breath tripping over hope. "Soon," her mother said. "Soon, if we keep showing up." Amara called the first family by name, a name that sang when she spoke it, and the crowd clapped the kind of claps that don't perform, they thank. She placed the key in the mother's palm with both hands, a gift and a charge. The mother's chest hitched. The child squealed. That pure note only children have when the world finally says yes. The father wiped his eye with the back of his wrist like he was just adjusting his cap. A second family. A third. Laughter shook dust from old disappointments. Joy did the thing it does when it's real. It reached the edges and asked them to come in. Evelyn stood in all that and felt the opposite of what she felt at parties where music tried to cover how empty it was. She felt small, and it didn't feel like punishment, it felt like truth. She moved forward slow, a woman stepping into her own weather. And, when the space opened in front of her, because people will always make a path when they see someone coming with their head bent to learn, she reached the edge of the platform. Amara had just handed another key to a grandfather with hands, like ropes and a smile that made the day brighter. She turned and saw Evelyn and did not flinch. No anger flared across her face like a flag. No triumph sharpened her mouth. Calm dignity, the same steady light she carried into rooms that tried to shake it loose. Evelyn spoke first, because old habits die loud. But her voice came out small. Not because it was weak, but because it had finally learned to leave room. "I didn't know who you were," she said, each word set down careful, as if the sentence might break and cut her. The crowd softened, a hush willing a better version of the moment into being. Amara blinked once, and it looked like a prayer. "You didn't need to," she said. "You only needed to know I was someone." The sentence hung in the air like a bridge nobody had built until this second. Evelyn nodded, and the nod was not a performance. It was surrender. Tears broke at the edges of her pride and ran like something clean, washing something dirty. She tried to speak again, but the words turned to salt in her mouth. She pressed her lips together and stepped back so she wouldn't get in the way of the work. Amara turned to the crowd and climbed the 2 steps onto the small stage. The wood flexed like a muscle. She looked out over faces that were used to being counted but not seen, and her throat lifted a fraction like the moment before a song. "Never measure a person by their accent or their clothes," she said. "Never measure a person by what you pay them or what you post about them, because respect doesn't depend on where you're from. Respect depends on who you are when no one's watching." The sentence rolled over the crowd like shade on a hot day. Heads nodded. A boy near the back whispered, "That part." Someone snapped fingers. Someone said, "Amen." The drumline picked up a gentle beat as if it had been waiting for the line to land. She thanked the city again, and the elders and the youth who would plant the first tree. Then she lifted the shovel, simple steel with a ribbon tied to it, and drove it into the soil. The sound was not dramatic. It was honest. Metal met earth, earth accepted. Others followed, a line of hands, all shades, all sizes, lifting something heavy together because that's the only way heavy things move. Evelyn stayed at the edge and pressed her palm flat against her own chest, as if reminding her heart that it still knew how to learn. She looked down at her shoes, clean and wrong for dirt, and thought, take them off. She did not yet. But the thought itself was new enough to make her shake. As the keys ran out and the speeches ended, a breeze came up and pulled at the rope ribbon until the colors fluttered like small flags insisting on joy. The little girl with the pink beret turned and saw Evelyn standing by herself and, because children are born knowing how to ask the right questions, she walked over. "Are you getting a key?" the child asked. Evelyn crouched, knees protesting a humility they didn't practice. "Not today," she said, voice wet but steady. "Today, I'm getting a lesson." The girl nodded like that made sense and ran back to her mother with news. The crowd began to drift toward tables where aunties had laid out food, where stories would grow into plans and plans into work. Amara stepped down and the volunteers encircled her in the soft way teams do when they know joy must be guarded. She found a path through them and approached Evelyn one last time. They stood close enough to see the cost in each other's faces. "I'm sorry," Evelyn managed, and the words were plain, unadorned, the way apologies should be. "I can't change what I did, but I can change what I do." Amara nodded, because forgiveness is not a switch but a door you open and hold. "Then show up when the cameras don't," she said. "Show up when the forms are long and the meetings are longer. Show up when the rain delays the pour and we need tarps and hands." Evelyn inhaled like a diver and nodded back. "Tell me when," she said. "We just did," Amara answered, and her smile was small and real, a sunrise just starting. Evelyn stepped away, not to hide, but to listen. She found a spot beside the stack of shovels and watched a boy teach his grandmother how to take a selfie with their key because they wanted to remember the exact shape of joy. She wept then, quiet and unremarkable, the way a spring starts under rock persistent, changing the ground one small run at a time. And somewhere between the ache of her guilt and the steadiness of Amara's grace, the sound of dignity rose and stretched and covered the day, louder than any laughter that ever called itself power. People went on laughing, but it was a different laugh now, a kind one, an honest one, the kind that builds walls straight and turns a key with both hands. And if you stood still long enough, you could hear the city answer back with its own promise: respect, or the foundation will crack.